Note that this video will not mention the wording of the recent leak that is going round, although I will discuss the source of it and obviously the fact that the leak exists. So irrespective of the vagaries of the leaks and rumours soap opera, I have for a long time argued that a 2D Metroid game is pretty much imminent. Dread was a success, certainly by the property's standards. The parts of Mercury Steam's team most dedicated to Metroid have been quiet for a long time. We know Sakamoto expressed interest in the series continuing. Nintendo is in the midst of an IP expansion focus, where they are putting a lot of time and treasure into rejuvenating Metroid with the release recently of Metroid Prime 4, plus Metroid games are often graphically appealing, making it a great Switch 2 showcase game. I've been saying for a long time, therefore, that 2D Metroid is really in the any day now camp, and I don't see any significant reason to shift from that perspective. Of course, while that is the plan, there are also realities that Nintendo will be coping with. Metroid Prime 4 had a relatively rough launch. Sakamoto is past retirement age, and it's not completely clear that he's still involved with the property, and they probably want to give the property a major lift, given that it's yet to have a major breakthrough game. Therefore, I wanted to take a step back and consider where Metroid is going in the short term, medium term, and the long term. What games are coming, when are they coming, and how will their release schedule go? What roles will Sakamoto and Tanabe play, and what legacies will they leave behind once they go? Let's start by considering the long term plan as it was at the beginning of the decade, and I think the plan was fairly clear. Pivot from the successful partnerships with Mercury Steam on Samus Returns to make a major new Metroid that, with its dark and moody aesthetics, might also make a perfect showcase game for the luscious blacks of the Switch OLED. At the same time, bootstrap retro studios from the doldrums of the mid-2010s to a fully functioning AAA studio by first finishing up the remaster of their greatest triumph, the original Metroid Prime, and then delivering the much-hyped Metroid Prime 4. Then use this momentum to hopefully progressively raise the profile of the property, with a particular eye on capturing an audience that Metroid, uniquely among Nintendo's top properties, is able to capture some of the time. More Western, more core gamer focused, and older audiences. This audience has a particular advantage to Nintendo on a purely economic basis, as they are disproportionately likely to be more affluent, and while you might not feel it personally, Western sales are still most profitable for Nintendo compared to Japanese ones given the exchange rate situation, so books, amiibo, and other Metroid merch still has quite a bit of value to them. Quite aside from this, Metroid complements new hardware, as even if people don't play the game, it's a great shop window for the specs of what the system can do, and may draw attention from gamers on PC and other consoles, even if these don't immediately lead to sales. In genre terms, the sci-fi aesthetic isn't completely unusual among Nintendo's output. Star Fox, F-Zero, and indeed Kirby and Mario have plenty of planet-hopping action after all, but the specific blend of horror with the sci-fi gives it a quite distinctive footprint. It shouldn't be a surprise for all these reasons that Nintendo has gone really, really hard on pushing Metroid despite a chain of absolutely terrible selling games in the 2010s with Other M, Federation Force, and even the critically applauded Samus Returns sinking more or less without a trace. Plans like these aren't like cars, they're like oil tankers. Even if Nintendo wanted to overreact to Metroid Prime 4's apparently soft launch, game development takes years, so they're already invested. I'm sure there will be contingencies in place, but this involves tacking this way or that, rather than completely starting over. So to start with, I do think we will have a new 2D title, and that will have been the plan long before Metroid Prime 4 Beyond released, and long before any of the controversy surrounding it. The fact of it, Nintendo can't change and wouldn't want to change. Dread was a big hit, and this one may be too. It may actually be quite a good thing to follow up Prime with something that has more success in order to rejuvenate the fortunes of Metroid a little bit. But they do need to think about their positioning. If Prime 4 were a huge and obvious hit, they might want to give it more time in the sun, another holiday season to really prove itself. That doesn't appear to be the case, but equally there's arguably little point of giving a very long lead-in if it distracts from a current product that they can still sell. And so in this case, I think it's quite plausible that they might not want to give months and months for the next Metroid game to be promoted, but instead do a shorter run, and in the meantime keep pushing Metroid Prime 4 to the extent that they can. Some have tried to infer a possible date from the gap between ratings boards' confirmations and releases, but this is tricky for numerous reasons. Looking at the German board USK, which is the most transparent, Metroid Dread was rated on the 1st of July and released early October, but that was a fairly unusual example. Paper Mario the Origami King was rated in January and released in July. Metroid Prime 4 was rated in July for a release in December, and of course there are odd examples like Metroid Prime Remastered and Fire Emblem Engage, where they were held back for far, far longer. Nintendo could easily sit on this game for 18 months and shove it out the door, but equally, while the 27th of August will be on the tight side, I think it's still not something we can completely exclude. Besides Nintendo's own choices, the other X factor here is that we don't know about the specifics of the Brazilian board, and how early or late on these boards give the thumbs up. Presumably all these boards don't work at the same pace, and so it's quite possible that the title would take different times in different locations. It's also completely possible that different regional versions have different schedules, and so it might be that if the Portuguese language version of the game was a relatively late development, then it could be confirmed for the ratings board much closer to release than the other versions. I suspect Nintendo would prioritize the larger or more profitable markets, of which Brazil wouldn't be one, so it's possible that we'll find out that the game has already been rated for weeks by other censors. Therefore, in this video, rather than try to extrapolate out from the uncertain information that's been provided, I want to try to take the broad perspective of how Nintendo handles a problem like Metroid. Let's consider practicalities. Nintendo typically releases games with about 3 weeks in between. They've actually been a bit more aggressive late with Nintendo Switch 2 editions and smaller games like Rhythm Heaven, but I still think for their bigger games, 3 weeks is the kind of default we can expect. With Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave dated to mid-September and Switch Sports Resort dated to late October, that leaves a few very blatant gaps in their schedule that remain unfilled. One is the 27th of August, the last Thursday of that month. Traditionally, if Nintendo has an August game at all, they often use this slot. Mario Plus Rabbids, Astral Chain, MEO, Star Cross Road. Your digital drops, Dragon Drive, Kirby's Dream Buffet, those are fine to run in mid-August, but my guess is that given that Japan has a very strong work culture and balances this by taking a lot of time off in August, the logistics involved with getting a game to market in the physical realm are better served with a late August release date as far as Nintendo's internal politics go. I think a physical game in this window is therefore highly likely. The next possible window would be the 1st or 8th of October, which is near perfectly a match for Dread's release date. The other would be November, which seems an odd choice given that it would be up against Grand Theft Auto, but it's not impossible as well. The December, probably 3rd of December game, well, this might give Beyond vibes if they put it there, given that it's exactly the slot that Metroid Prime 4 held last year. And then, of course, there's the whole of January's quarter in play, and frankly, that has to be the likeliest place at this point to run a new 2D Metroid game. However, that's not to say that Nintendo don't want to give Metroid a big push beforehand, and a shorter run might have a lot of advantages when it comes to this. There are 2 recent examples of Nintendo trying to create some kind of moment around a property. In 2023, they released Pikmin 1 Plus 2, did a lot of hype with Pikmin Bloom, which had been out only a year, and then released Pikmin 4 alongside a massive groundswell of publicity in Japan especially. The Pikmin fruit sandwiches always stick in my mind, but they really went hard on Pikmin promotion. But we have a far more recent example. In June 2026, they announced the brand new Xenoblade Genesis game, and to hype people up as well, they announced not 1 but 3 Nintendo Switch 2 editions of past Xenoblade titles, all releasing in a 6-month or so window. And of course, this following up the relatively recent release of Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition Nintendo Switch 2 edition. The safe money always has to be on some kind of standard release schedule, of course. Tease the game in September, drop it in February, but Nintendo might have other reasons to rattle some Metroid cages beforehand. I think there would be 2 major objectives served by an earlier and more short notice release schedule, which could see Metroid release in 2026. Objective 1, they can make a lot of noise. If your property is relatively niche, and while Xenoblade has some outsized successes, with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 particularly, it medians in the low millions sold, then making noise is one way to push it into new territory. One Xenoblade release becomes background noise. 4 in 1 year, and then of course the new game the following year, well, that makes the property garner much more attention, because not just when the ads are launched, but potentially throughout the year, people will be continuously streaming and talking about Xenoblade for months, creating a real sense of expectation around the property and keeping it in the conversation for the long term. I think Nintendo are working very well with the algorithms in this case, and I think they kind of understand that if they can keep people talking about Xenoblade, it will create a sense of it being an ever-present focus for gamer conversation. Objective 2, double down on your existing audience. It's very difficult to get new players to try different games, and while that's an important part of expanding key properties like this, what's also key is getting the people who already like your title to show up. Millions more people bought Dread than bought Metroid Prime Remastered, let alone Metroid Prime 4. But one benefit of having a deep bench of games like this is that if they get it right, they can sell not just one title at a time, but several. The obvious way to do this, it strikes me, is with Nintendo Switch 2 edition versions of Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered. Dread especially feels absolutely obvious because you want people to replay the last game before the new one. Granted, this wouldn't work with every property. I suspect they don't want to emphasize Odyssey in the run-up to a new 3D Mario because they want the game to stand without comparisons. I don't know it would work with Fire Emblem either. The fact is, Nintendo will have stats on this. How many people actually bounce from game to game in quick succession in their play? I know that I have gone from Metroid to Metroid when I'm on a Metroid run, and from Xenoblade to Xenoblade, but I don't generally go from Mario title to Mario title. I might really enjoy playing Mario Galaxy, but that doesn't necessarily mean I then want to follow that up with playing another Mario title. Those kinds of games just scratch a different itch, and I think a lot of it is the narrative component. If Metroid 6 clearly evolves out of the story of Metroid 5, and given the seismic ending of that title, how could it not, then it's an obvious move to encourage people to check out Dread first, because the narrative momentum will drive people towards the subsequent game. By the way, that's not to say that non-narrative games don't benefit from this kind of pre-push as well. They released Luigi's Mansion on 3DS a year before Luigi's Mansion 3, but that was a far more niche title, at least at the time. At any rate, I think you can see that their best strategy may be to throw everything and the kitchen sink at Metroid. This has the dual benefit that if they're shopping around the property as a potential film or television project, and irrespective of how you feel about that prospect, I have to warn you that they absolutely are, then the property looks like it's in rude health and engaging people. Of course, that strategy won't have been helped by the flat response to Metroid Prime 4, but 1. Nintendo didn't know how Metroid Prime 4 would land when they would have commissioned the current run of games. 2. Boosting Metroid will go some way to letting retailers shift their unwanted Prime stocks as well, which will ease relations on that front. And 3. In certain respects, it's even more critical to change the narrative around Metroid that has persisted for the last few months that it's a tainted property in some way or another, and have what they will hope to be a hugely successful new game that will change the conversation. I do think Plan A probably would have been a Metro release in August. I've talked before about why. September on makes sense to be Zelda's Corner of the Sky, full tilt 40th anniversary. They don't really want Samus muscling into that. But the limbo period before that is a great place for something different. It's the spooky season in Japan, it's quiet periods across the world, and Nintendo have experience with mini hype cycles before. Remember Emio, a weird tease and a game reveal and a release date just around the corner. 6 weeks, all in for the hype cycle of that game. Let's be honest, how many Famicom Detective Club games were likely to garner that kind of attention under normal circumstances? If they just launched a trailer and said, oh, a new Famicom Detective Club is coming in 9 months' time, who really would have cared? I mean, me, but not that many people. Same with Star Fox. The movie, cameo, and then the Star Fox Direct was the best possible presentation of that game. Obviously, a new version of Star Fox will be exciting to people at any time, but I think if it had been revealed alongside Air Riders, Bonanza, and Mario Kart World last April or even last September, alongside Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave and the Mario 40th Direct presentation, it would have lessened its impact. This is what I mean by building a moment around a property, and that goes double if they have stuff to sell. Metroid Prime retrospective art books, amiibos, and old games. So yes, I really believe that Plan A, the most logical game plan to me, would always have been to go Samus mad for a few weeks and then move quickly on. But if the game is newly rated, that does suggest that on balance it's likelier for 2027 than anything else irrespective of what the original plan might have been. That's not necessarily a problem, of course. Xenoblade Genesis in 2027 is not precluding Xenoblade fans from eating very well this year, but it probably changes the way that Nintendo are going to be able to approach it. If the rumours are true that there's going to be a smaller pixel remake project, that might make more sense for an August window, and I do think the dates to watch are the actual anniversary date of the 6th of August and that missing slot on the 27th of August. All that said, if Nintendo don't have anything to drop in August, the next most likely Metroid Physical Edition release date would probably be, to me, the 17th of September 2026. Yes, that sounds mad because it is, of course, Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave Day, but think about it. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition in Switch 2 Edition, never get tired of saying that, launched day and date with Tomodachi Life, presumably because it was a small shipment and it absorbs cost to have it go out alongside Tomodachi. With Fire Emblem, the case is even stronger because while Fire Emblem has been building a reputation in the West, its base is still tilted towards the Japanese market, a market that definitely does not respond very well to Metroid. Therefore, a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, most likely of Dread, feels quite plausible for September. But just because the physical version released in September doesn't mean it can't shadow drop beforehand. If I were Nintendo, I'd make a Metroid Dread Nintendo Switch 2 edition available day and date on Metroid Day on the 6th of August. But whether or not they'll do that, we'll have to wait and see. Now, there are a lot of other levers Metroid can pull. Metroid Prime 4 conspicuously has had no updates or changes at all, even bug fixes, as far as I'm aware. Now, maybe that's just Retro walking away from it, or they want to try some adjustments and push it out all in one go. On the other hand, Nintendo doesn't want to send good money after bad, especially when Retro's highly paid staff could be focusing on the next big thing. But on the other hand, if they feel that there are simple things that could spike interest in the game once more, perhaps a boss rush mode, especially given how well received the bosses are, this would be consistent with the kind of smaller tweaks they've made of 6 to 12 months into previous titles such as Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, and for that matter, the original Metroid Dread. Metroid Prime Remastered is the riskier one here to do anything with. If you do a Metroid Prime Remastered Nintendo Switch 2 edition, does it benefit the series because it draws attention to the Prime game everyone likes by comparison to Prime 4, which had a more mixed reception, or does it just spark negative reflections, earned or unearned, on Prime 4? By the way, I really like Beyond, and when there's a quiet period I'll talk in more depth about how it's only gone up in my estimation since my first playthrough, but with neither the Switch nor Switch 2 version topping 1 million, and reviews mixed, especially by Prime's lofty standards, I doubt Nintendo are entirely happy with it. I guess the question is, would highlighting Prime benefit sales for the Prime series, or would it just detract from the hype around a new Metroid? I think on balance there's little to lose from getting these titles out in their best possible form sooner rather than later, and so even if there is a risk that Prime Remastered cannibalizes some sales from Prime 4, this seems to be a sufficiently minor issue that I think they can get away with it. I also think they may find, using all the data they're assiduously gathering from players, that the players of the recent Star Fox visual remake may be worth targeting by the Metroid Prime Remastered game, another low-cost new version of a hugely acclaimed title, and so it might be a wave that they're willing to ride at this point. Overall, then, I think the likeliest outcome we'll see is a big Metroid push at some point, and I would suspect prior to September. I think they'll maybe showcase Metroid 6, probably for February-ish, announce and probably shadow drop a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Dread, and maybe do some stuff with the Primes as well. Smaller scale stuff like a Nintendo Switch Online Challenge Gauntlet for the past Metroids, perhaps something akin to the Donkey Kong Challenge, might also make quite a lot of sense, especially if they can judge how much people are accessing these games and therefore infer which titles they might want to develop further on. A really weird left field option would be to bring back Samus Returns, but I think they'll want to make more of that, and a game of any scale right now before Metroid 6 wouldn't work. Although they've had a lot of Metroid products in production at once over recent years, I do suspect that Nintendo will be a little bit cautious about greenlighting too much more at this point. This really does feel like the window of time in which, if they're going to make a major push for Metroid to have some kind of wider IP impact, they're going to want to try to make a close on that deal now. After that, they might risk sending good money after bad. I do think the 2D series, as long as Mercury Steam are remaining good partners, will continue at roughly the same current pace as we've seen, although of course it might also be the case that if they did separate from Mercury Steam that there could be a longer interruption before we get to a new game. As for Prime, I've talked about that in a separate video, and I do think it is quite possible that we will see more from Prime. I don't think Nintendo are ready to abandon it just yet, and I even think it's possible that we could see a Metroid Prime 2 remastered game under certain circumstances, but there are definitely very significant risks to any new Prime endeavour, not least the fact that they are quite costly to produce compared to the apparent income they generate. In terms of forecasts, let's go with these. 90% there is some form of new Metroid announcement by the end of 2027, 90% there is at least one as yet unannounced first-party game for 2026, 70% Metroid 6 launched in January to March of 2027, 50% there's a new Metroid announcement by the end of October 2026, 30% there's a Metroid release by the end of 2026. I think on balance we're looking at 2027, but lots of different possibilities are on the table. At any rate, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do check out the Patreon, and I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.